right, we've kind of touched upon the concepts, how to practice, how to start to vary the lies. What about some more adaptations and perhaps what you should be using in the bottom end of that bag? So we talked about, for creating a base to work from, what I like to think as a core shot or a core movement that you can start to vary things from. The second thing to then be thinking about is, right, when I need to adapt, I need to change something. So there's a real simple little thing that we can think about, and it's all to do with how we've been setting to that ball. So we've been trying to get the hands a little bit higher, allowing ourselves to make this shallow motion. But if we start to vary that, so we get it much more vertical, more shallow, we can start to vary the flight. Now it's great now, we've got something we can go to. So it can mean with the same lofted club. So here if I get very, very vertical, so I've got this club now right up on its toe end. So I'm really struggling almost to keep my hands on that club. It's really getting out there. But that can be a really strong way for me to keep the ball flight down. Because now, as much as I try and keep my hands out and keep relatively vertical, I'm going to get a little bit steeper. I'm going to probably de-loft even a little bit more than the natural shaft length. I'm going to keep a bit less loft on that club coming through impact. I might even find that because I'm so vertical, that I get a little bit of closure, almost creating a drawing shot. So even here though, I've got a 50 degree club, very vertical, comes out relatively low, and even on this kind of wet turf, it wants to jump up. Vice versa, if I want to sit this higher. So if I now start, instead of having the shaft in its natural position, I now lower my hands, so I get low down. When getting low down, I'm probably going to have to get a bit wider with my stance. That's going to allow me to create a lot more loft. So I think most of us will go and do this in a bunker. We tend to get low down, we tend to get here and then show it out. Difficult thing we've got to watch out for here is as we do that, this lie angle now is pointing off line. I'm going to hit a pull. So I'm probably going to have to open the blade a certain amount. And be very careful when you're opening the blade of a golf club. See lots of people, yeah, I've opened the blade. The reality is when they swing, they're just going to bring it back to square. So what you've got to do is you've got to hold the club wrong. You've got to grip it before you open it. If I now get into that shallow position, and the difficult thing with this, again, staying like that was easy at hold posture. Staying like this is a bit more difficult, but the same loft physically has produced a different flight. So obviously one thing that happens when you do that is you start to mess around, you start to use the sole shape. So this can be a really useful way of working around the lie. It's very much using the lie of the ball, there, rather than the lie of the club. Because again, if I get low down, I can keep that loft there. If I get very vertical, I can take a bit of that loft, a bit more of that loft off. It becomes a bit easier to get my shaft leaving. But again, be very, very careful once you start opening the blade, because it does mean you're starting to show the sole to the club, and it's where the design of the club becomes really important, that it needs to match in with how you move your golf club. If I did the same thing here, so this is a more lofted club, my 56. So I'm trying to essentially do the same core movement up here, and again I'm changing the starting position. I want to hit it in a bit lower. Again, leaning the club between shots. So now I'm getting right up on the toe. This is going to make it want to close down as well. So I'm going to struggle to get the loft. So it's bringing it in a different direction. The other thing to think about at this point as well is your wedges you carry. Now, I see lots and lots of people and they have their gap wedge, sand wedge, lob wedge, all of this type of speciality wedge. Difficulty being their 50, 52 degree club, might be a 48, 49 degree club with some of the pitching wedges these days, is actually still a relatively full swing shot, so it needs a bit of help, a bit of forgiveness. So we often end up with some weaker clubs than we probably should be playing with. So I have to admit, my gap wedge matches the rest of my clubs because it's a 50 club, so it's a pitching wedge. In reality, in real terms, you know, to a certain extent, although it creates a ball flight that is weaker than what a pitching wedge would create, you know, there's a whole load of things going on about how the ball takes off differently now, head design makes the ball take off differently. So if we had 50 degree pitching wedges, the ball would balloon. So pitching, that's why the pitching wedges partly have gone forward. Obviously it helps with marketing golf clubs, helps to sell them. But think about that. Certainly your main chipping club might well, particularly if you're not somebody who adapts and changes the position of the club too much, you want to use that loft to work it. Think about getting the gap wedge in the same model head that you've got. The other thing to be thinking about is what these soles and everything do. So if you've got a club that doesn't have much shape, doesn't appear to be very blunt at the bottom, the problem can be once, you know, nice firm turf, that can be very, very great because your club will get to the back of the ball and no further, you know, it won't slide underneath, and then you get your contact points right the way up here and we get more of a problem. So for a lot of us, the conditions we tend to play in, clubs, you know, this is again, it's a very personal thing, is I use a wedge that's relatively broad, particularly at the toe, has a certain amount of bounce, is ground away here. The grinds can be really, really useful because bounce is your friend. What it does, it just stabilises that club's position through impact. And it tends to keep the weight relatively low down because we don't want that strike position going up here. So if you've got a bit more bounce, it keeps that strike position relatively low on the face, then bottom 4 or 5 grooves, and gets it moving forward. So don't be thinking, oh, I've got to go for a bladey wedge straight away. Certainly you might find that it's a little bit easier for if you like to open and close the blade. The bladey style clubs, the head design can suit a lot more. It lends itself to that sort of thing. A club like this, when you open it up, looks very, very strange. But for me personally, I like a club that I can tell it's very open or it's very closed. I like it to look more that way. I don't like the little changes. Second thing to always be aware of is also how fast you're swinging the club. If you're swinging the club with your 7, 8 iron at 60, 70 miles an hour, you're probably not going to need a 60 degree club, a 55 or 56 degree club, and then a 52 degree club, because you're not going to see the differences in distances. You're probably going to find, if you have one high lofty club, 58 or 60, say, one kind of a weaker wedge, say 50, 52 or maybe 54, slightly bigger gaps because you're swinging it slower, so the ball's not going to go as far anyway. So use something that weakens the flights and gives you 10 to more to 15 yard gaps. They're, as human beings, more perceptible. You know, very tough for me to, when I'm playing, even when I'm playing a lot of golf, to notice a 10 yard difference between shots. 15's a little bit easier. I can then make better decisions. And equally, you're not going to find, when you're playing around the greens, if you're swinging it slower, you're not going to necessarily make as many manipulations. You're probably going to be kind of, right, I want to use this loft. I'm not going to generate the speed to create that very, very high ball flight and all those sorts of things. So having slightly bigger gaps in your wedges is not necessarily a bad thing. But also, third thing with your wedges, be very wary of the shaft that goes in there. So a lot of the wedges these days will come with wedge flex. Wedge flex is based on the dynamic gold, which is one of the heaviest sculpt shafts on the market. The last heavy two or three of the heaviest is dynamic gold. So certainly if you're playing with lighter weight shafts, I mean I have Ping ZZ65s, which are 105 gram shaft. So in my wedges, I only go a tiny bit heavier because the head itself is a little bit heavier, but I'm looking at lighter shafts. If I put a dynamic gold wedge flex in there or something like that, it feels very heavy, and then you're going to have problems translating your golf swings rather than doing what you can do well. Certainly if you're using graphite, keep graphite into your wedges as well. But if you've got lighter weight iron shafts, go into lighter weight wedge shafts. And the companies are getting a lot better with this now. Quite a few have started to offer a lighter weight shaft because that's the vast majority of what their customers are getting.
I know how to do that beatbox.